introducir la introducción del artículo en el cual Elizabeth Jeffries es coautora. El artículo se llama La necesidad de una constricción y la comprensión del rol de la corteza cingulada en la impulsividad. En la introducción leemos que primero la definición de conducta impulsiva. La conducta impulsiva ocurre cuando las acciones tienen una pobre conceptualización, están expresadas de forma prematura, son riesgosas, son inapropiadas para la situación y a menudo tienen consecuencias no deseables. En ese sentido, es lo que habitualmente se define.
Sí, comienza con la definición de, me parece, de los conceptos que va a ser central en un texto, ¿no? Que es conducta impulsiva. Siempre los papers comienzan con eso, con definiciones conceptuales. Después vamos a ver cómo lo pasa a variar.
Perfecto. Creo que acá hay algo que es central, que es poorly conceived, que es pobremente concebida, o sea, tiene una concepción rudimentaria o ni siquiera tiene una concepción. Y entonces en esa concepción ahí está asociada a conceptualización.
Sí, recuerdo también un poco capaz los típicos pop-ups, vía corona radiada de estado ansioso.
Bueno, es un constructo muy amplio que permite explicar la influencia de la conducta, de la emoción, la cognición y la motricidad en la conducta en un rango muy amplio de resultados funcionales. En diferentes aspectos de impulsividad fueron evaluados. Una de las escalas más comunes es la escala de Barrett, por cuestionarios, se menciona el UPPS, donde se realiza una escala que generalmente identifica componentes o factores. En este caso hay 4 componentes. Primero, la urgencia negativa, que refiere a la necesidad de actuar de una manera urgente debido a un estado de ánimo negativo. La falta de perseverancia, que describe circunstancias donde la persona tiene dificultades en mantenerse en una tarea. La falta de premeditación, que refleja una habilidad dañada en evaluar las consecuencias futuras de una acción, y la búsqueda de sensaciones, que es una tendencia a buscar y a comprometerse en tareas peligrosas, novedosas y que resulten excitantes. Luego hay unos autores que agregaron un quinto componente, que es la urgencia positiva, que se diferencia de la actividad urgente negativa porque ocurre bajo condiciones tanto de estados de ánimos negativos como de estados de ánimos positivos. Aunque el constructo de impulsividad tiene un amplio rango, con una mixtura heterogénea de factores cognitivos y afectivos bien establecidos, no está claro por qué hay una variedad de atributos cognitivos y conductuales que tienden a coocurrir en las personas. Es posible que el entendimiento de la arquitectura neurocognitiva que sirve de soporte a los diferentes tipos de impulsividad pueda ayudar a explicar qué es lo que causa que existan estas agrupaciones de diversos síntomas bajo la rúbrica de que están todos dentro de un mismo constructo psicológico. También son constructos psicológicos antiguos, son constructos psicológicos viejos. Para tener en cuenta la evidencia neurocognitiva que ha implicado la alteración en cómo en la interacción del córtex con el sistema límbico y el sistema del estriado, así también como las diferencias en los diferentes niveles de las redes cerebrales, van a ser las que, bueno, se van a abordar aquí. Una de las estructuras corticales que pueden estar mediando la conducta impulsiva es la corteza cingulada anterior. Recientemente, se cita un trabajo de Castellanos y Ryan, argumentaron que junto con otras regiones de la corteza prefrontal, la corteza cingulada anterior es importante en la impulsividad porque el rol en muchas funciones cognitivas ha sido alterado en la impulsividad. Los autores argumentan que en muchos de estos procesos cognitivos que contribuyen a la impulsividad, a la toma de decisiones y que impactan en la conducta, involucran diferentes aspectos de las funciones ejecutivas, tales como planificación, la inhibición de una respuesta motora y problemas en la percepción y la focalización de la atención en información ambiental, la atención selectiva y la memoria de trabajo. Estos procesos están parcialmente mediados por la interacción entre la corteza cingulada anterior y otros aspectos de la corteza prefrontal. Los estudios que implican la corteza cingulada anterior en un amplio rango de procesos cognitivos diferentes que podrían tener relevancia con la impulsividad incluyen el monitoreo de conflictos, que fue descrito por Botvinnik, la atención, el control motor, la memoria de trabajo, el task switching, que podría ser explicado como un cambio en la realización de tareas o multitasking, realización de diferentes tareas al mismo tiempo, eh, elecciones y inhibición de respuestas prepotentes. También se ha evidenciado un involucramiento de procesos sociales complejos, así también como la regulación de estados emocionales y de la falta de compromiso o desenganche de tareas de manera consistente con el rol en muchos procesos diferentes, la arquitectura funcional de la corteza singular anterior sugiere que es importante para integrar y procesar la información de diferentes fuentes para guiar la conducta. Es un hub cortical con proyecciones a diferentes áreas del cerebro, tanto en no humanos como en seres humanos, permitiendo una integración tanto bottom-up como top-down, desde diferentes regiones de la corteza. De acuerdo a todo esto, se han realizado varias líneas de investigación que han demostrado la existencia de distintas subdivisiones funcionales dentro de la corteza singular anterior. La conectividad funcional estudia de qué manera estos patrones de conectividad están organizados a lo largo de un gradiente rostro-caudal con regiones en la corteza media cingulada, localizada caudalmente a la corteza singular anterior, involucrada en el procesamiento motor y en regiones más anteriores implicadas en procesos generales de control, como los aspectos subgenuales implicados en el sistema límbico y en la red por defecto. Es importante destacar que estos patrones de conectividad no significan que estas regiones de la corteza singular anterior sirven a funciones discretas o diferentes en todas las circunstancias. Por ejemplo, hay un gran número de estudios con resonancia magnética funcional que estudian de qué manera hay una activación asociada de la regulación emocional en regiones dorsales y rostrales de la corteza singular anterior, así también como en el área subgenual. Recordemos que genu significa rodilla. Para una revisión de los picos de activación de la corteza singular anterior, se cita a qué texto hay que referirse. Bueno, en este estudio lo que se va a explorar es si diferentes aspectos de la impulsividad pueden ser estudiados en términos de una variación funcional en redes discretas, disociables en la corteza singular anterior. Hay diferentes vías en las cuales la arquitectura funcional de la corteza anterior podría dar cuenta de diferentes aspectos de la conducta impulsiva. Una posibilidad es que, porque la corteza singular anterior es una región heterogénea funcionalmente de la corteza, diferentes rasgos cognitivos de la impulsividad dependerían de la desregulación en diferentes regiones de la corteza singular anterior. Es decir, que estamos tomando la corteza singular anterior como un hub de la impulsividad porque están arribando inputs de diferentes zonas. Una segunda posibilidad es que una única región de la corteza singular anterior podría estar vinculada a diferentes aspectos de la impulsividad por exhibir diferentes patrones de conectividad, cada uno asociado con un diferente tipo de conducta impulsiva. Consistente con esta visión de que hay un hub, la evidencia ha implicado que en el cingulado medio anterior hay múltiples demandas de la red por defecto o default network, un sistema que desempeña un importante rol en la producción de la cognición controlada a través de un amplio rango de diferentes circunstancias. De acuerdo a esta teoría o hipótesis de que el hub da cuenta de los datos, hay una variación en diferentes elementos de la impulsividad que podrían estar relacionados a un patrón único de conectividad funcional desde el cual en la misma región dentro de la corteza singular anterior, particularmente, estarían involucradas regiones que son propias de lo que habíamos colocado como MDN. Como está Elizabeth Jeffries aquí presente, MDN es Default Network, Default Mode Network. Bien, ¿querés resumir?
Sí, en primer lugar, que la conducta impulsiva, por ahí para los que recién se encuentran populares con este tipo de términos, hace referencia tanto a la impulsividad motora como cognitiva, como también conductual, sería. Motora, cognitiva y conductual, sí.
Sí.
Y lo que va a intentar ver este estudio es cómo diferentes factores de la conducta impulsiva se van a vincular con diferentes patrones, podríamos decir, de conectividad funcional que tienen como hub en esa conectividad al área que se denomina como corteza singular anterior, que es un área que es clave para numerosos procesos cognitivos, pero acá en lo que se va a hacer énfasis es en ver cómo, según varía la conectividad de esta área con otras, se puede lograr, no sé si predecir, pero asociarlo a un tipo de impulsividad, o a un factor de la impulsividad en específico.
Juan, vos distinguís conectividad funcional de conectividad estructural. ¿Podrías decir brevemente cómo lo diferencias?
Sí, conectividad funcional es que con una técnica que se denomina resonancia magnética funcional se observa que dos áreas, podríamos decir, se activan al mismo tiempo. Cuando una se activa, la otra se activa.
Coactivación.
Una coactivación. Mientras que conectividad estructural es cuando se puede determinar que existe una vía de sustancia blanca que conecta las dos regiones que en el otro caso simplemente se coactivan.
Y se pueden integrar la conectividad funcional y la conectividad estructural.
Claro, ese es el siguiente paso de cualquiera de los dos tipos de conectividad, digamos, poder determinar que existe el otro. Si existe conectividad funcional, lo ideal es poder encontrar la vía de conectividad estructural y viceversa.
Bueno, y ahora nos podemos dar un lujo, que es que en una síntesis de estos resultados, la misma Elizabeth Jefferies diga a qué conclusiones se han arribado de una manera breve, porque Elizabeth Jefferies está aquí presente. Then we had the pleasure to be in presence of Elizabeth Jefferies, that we will expose briefly the main conclusions of that study.
Okay. Well, in this study, we looked at the connectivity of the cingulate cortex, and we looked at regions that were spaced along the cingulate from the front part to the further back, and we looked at the connectivity of these regions to the executive network and the visual network, and we found that different patterns of functional connectivity at rest, so the parts of the brain that tend to co-activate over time when you're just lying in the scanner doing nothing, predicted how impulsive people were on questionnaires taken outside the scanner.
And between the two hypotheses, the hypothesis of a single hub in the cingulate anterior and the hypothesis of different parts of the cingulate.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, the results perhaps don't decisively come down in favour of a very simple hypothesis, but the subgenual part of the anterior cingulate was important for several of the patterns of connectivity that we saw. So it appeared as if, there was a particular part of the anterior cingulate cortex that was particularly predictive of people's impulsivity. But obviously impulsivity emerges from the action of the whole brain, so the connectivity of this particular region, which is important for controlling behaviour, to other parts of the brain which are important for controlling cognition and also important for allowing vision inputs to reach higher order cognitive areas.
Este artículo parecería relacionado con función ejecutiva e impulsividad. This article looks at the relation between executive functions and impulsivity. But your media, your experience is in semantic control. Which is the part when it's clear that semantic control is involved in this experiment?
Which part shows that semantics is important?
Yes, in this experiment.
Well, this experiment doesn't directly look at semantic cognition, but it's nevertheless related because the same networks that we have studied in relation to people controlling their semantic cognition are the networks that we look at in this study. So this study on impulsivity looks a lot at the relationship between the default move network and the executive network. And those networks are distributed across the whole brain, and they include regions which are important for semantic processing. And the interaction of those regions will allow you to control not only your behaviour in terms of impulsivity, but also potentially your thoughts about meaningful things, which is essentially semantic cognition. So how you can control which aspects of your knowledge that you retrieve at a given moment, so that you can do a particular task, or so that you can make sure that the information that you're thinking about is relevant to the context you're in.
This article looks very interesting. Este artículo es muy interesante because the examples of most of the cognitive semantic control are linked to the use of any tool in different ways. But in this context, we are talking about behaviors that are not appropriate in a context or not well conceived behavior. So the examples need to be different when you pass to semantic cognitive control.
That's right. Yes.
Lo que dije fue que en la mayoría de los publicaciones se brindan ejemplos, por ejemplo, de un cuchillo, the knife, that is a very important hub. Y son ejemplos de un tool, una herramienta que tiene una utilización principal, a main, but tiene utilizaciones derivadas o alternativas. Pero en este caso estamos hablando de comportamientos impulsivos, inapropiados, no conceptualizados, que, por ejemplo, en la población argentina son muy frecuentes, que la conducta impulsiva es muy frecuente. Entonces, ¿cómo sería un ejemplo de alguien que publica en cognición semántica controlada en este contexto? What about an example of one top researcher of semantic control that need to give an example in this context?
So you're looking for an example that shows how the same control processes are important for behavior and for meaning. Is that what you meant?
Yes, because in the other papers, the examples are, we have a knife, the knife could be used like a spoon, but when you are talking about impulsive behavior and you are talking about semantic control, you need to change the examples to
Yes.
What kind of example?
I guess the take-home message might be that the control of thought, which is important in semantic cognition, and the control of behavior, which is important in impulsivity, have a lot in common in terms of the way the brain is organised. And when you want to control your behaviour, that control is partly achieved through changing the way that you're thinking. So to take the example of the knife, a person who is impulsive might use the knife in a stereotypical way, even if that wasn't required at the time. or even if that wasn't the purpose of what they were intending to do. So it might be essentially a distraction activity, not relevant for what they were trying to achieve. And if you're able to use semantic control to think about different meanings of the knife or the different ways that the knife could be used in different contexts, that type of processing would potentially allow you to be less impulsive in your behaviour.
Because don't look clear that the impulsivity behavior is related with a lack of control of the dominant meaning of a knife. It's like a change of level.
I think there are differences between the control of behaviour and the control of thought, as well as similarities. And one of the differences is that when you want to control semantic cognition, you have to change memory retrieval. And that involves the ability to change the aspects of information that come to mind. Whereas for the control of behaviour, that you can achieve greater control just by preventing action. So you can't prevent thought, but you can, to some extent, prevent inappropriate responses essentially at the motor level, in a more superficial level. So the control of semantic cognition might be using brain areas that are closer to the default mode network, while the control of action might involve brain areas that are closer to the motor network. So there will be differences between these domains.
Yes, because I imagine that one of the or some of the questions tomorrow will be about impulsivity and semantic control, but using semantic control more linked than thought control.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
And there is a difference in levels of analysis. Because in one level you are taking in account abstraction, concrete words, functional visual features, but in the another way you are taking in account that a person, for instance, here 3 years ago entered in a bank and shot to robber in a way not planned. There are not a plan, but this could be related with semantic cognition.
Of course, the same networks are important, but we also know that the control of behaviour, such as the ability to stop producing behaviour, which has become prepotent or dominant, tends to involve right hemisphere regions in the control network. So some of the regions that came up in the study on impulsivity are right lateralized regions, whereas the control of thought in the context of semantic control involves a strongly left lateralized network. And it might be that the control network, the executive network and the default mode network, which are normally to some extent anti-correlated over time. So when one network is responding, the other one will be suppressed. So they're anti-correlated. But it might be that the anti-correlation is lower in the left hemisphere, because when you want to control thought, you actually need to control memory representations, which are represented in the default mode network. So you need interaction between the executive regions and the default mode regions in a more direct way. While for the right hemisphere, those structures might be kept apart more. And then people who have differences in the connectivity of those right hemisphere regions might be the ones who have more impulsive actions. But I think we need to do more research because, to my knowledge, there isn't yet a study that directly compares impulsivity of action and, if you like, impulsivity of thought. So there are lots of similarities that have been found in previous studies, but in terms of how the left lateralized semantic control network relates to those questions, I think we don't yet quite know.
You have a question?
No, I was listening. Perhaps I don't have a question, but I think I can redo the question you were doing, perhaps to help interpret the thing.
Yes.
To help interpret the question that I think Julian was saying, because the levels of analysis of organization that he was talking about, I think, could be like very superficially described, like we might say brain networks at a level. Then you have cognitive and affective capacities or functions at the next level. Then you have the cognitive processes that are more in the ecological context. Then you might have behavior, a higher even level of analysis. And I think what he was asking was how, in a concrete example, could you, let's say, go through all the levels? Like, for example, in the case of the robber. And if you go through all the levels, can you, it's a difficult question, of course, but could you, like coherently and without doing any jumps in levels, including the explanation of the behavior, the ability of semantic control, like a typical impulsivity behavior? Because when you use even the word impulsivity in a social context, it's usually more referred to the type of behaviors that are even harder to explain.
Yes.
Like, I don't know. There's a very famous movie, for example, about a person that goes through a lot of frustrations throughout the day, and at a certain point just collapses and starts hitting people.
Yeah.
Yes, and this is it could be not clear what semantic control is linked to this type of to impulsivity.
I mean, in neuropsychology, impulsivity is often happens when people use objects that without a purpose. So there's this notion of utilization behavior when people will simply take an object that's available to them and use it purposelessly. So for example, they might take some scissors and just cut nothing, or they might cut paper but for no reason. So this is behavior which is driven by the presence of the object. The object is available and it allows a behavior, but the behavior isn't rooted in any cognitive any cognitive goal. There's no purpose. There's no more complicated underpinning for that behavior. So it's not designed to achieve anything. So semantic control is important for making the link between a state in the future that you can imagine, a goal state where you want something to happen because it's meaningful, and the cognitive processes that will allow you to change behavior or thought to take you to that goal. So if you want to use the scissors to make a snowflake for your window for Christmas, to cut up the paper to make the snowflake, then you need to have a plan of how to use the scissors. Whereas impulsive behavior tends to not have that plan behind it. So one way of thinking about it could be that semantic control, combined with the desire for action, which you can see in impulsive behavior, allows you to produce actions which achieve an objective rather than simply actions which use the objects in a more purposeless way. But of course, that's a very extreme example of impulsivity. So that's it's the kind of impulsivity you might see in patients with head injuries, for example. It's perhaps not quite the same as impulsivity that we encounter in everyday life, where we simply make small actions like checking our phones when we should be working, or saying something without really properly thinking through the consequences for the other person, which we didn't intend to say. And those types of impulsivity are more minor examples of something similar, where the behaviour has been generated by the circumstances, by the environment, which affords that behaviour, but the cognitive plan of the meaning that would underpin the behaviour is missing. So we sometimes make actions when we actually have a different plan. We want to work, but we end up checking our email because it's easier to check email. It's a very short-term goal, which then interferes with our ability to carry out a much longer-term and more complex, and if you like, more cognitively rooted, perhaps semantically controlled plan. So it is a difficult question. I don't know whether that answered your question, but I think that semantic control is definitely relevant to impulsivity. But it's perhaps one mechanism which can reduce impulsivity. But there are other circumstances in which we tend to see impulsive behaviours, which are really not about semantics at all. They're about sort of states of motivation and also the states in the environment that afford action. If you put a gun in a dangerous person's hand, they might use it without intending to, without necessarily having a plan to use it, but they might use it impulsively because the gun is available. So the gun then is the stimulus, if you like, for the impulsive action.
Yes. In the paper of Billy Martin, she used tasks that are more close to classic neuropsychological tasks. She defined the task like executive semantic, but there are tasks that, for instance, a story that is mixed and the person needs to order the story.
Yes.
So they are more global, dirty, not so specific to your studies that are more linked to specific songs that are linked to abstract graduation. Perhaps impulsivity could be related in an ecological study with the Villemaret type of tasks.
Yes, certainly. You need semantic control to understand how the different elements of a story can be related to form a coherent whole. And if you are unable to control the information that you generate for each little part of the story, it won't be possible to see the broader connections between those parts. So it wouldn't surprise me if that behaviour that you described relates to, for example, impulsivity. It's very interesting.
Lovatingal is a research from USA that they take orphans of the Balkanic War. They at first he did DDA studies. He detected that they hadn't developed the uncinate fasciculus, and they had a non-symbolic behavior.
Right.
The semantic executive task, global, like Billy Maret, like a very bad function, and a high impulsivity.
And that's interesting because some studies have linked, obviously, the Uncinate to aspects of semantic control and the control of cognition. But there are other tracks as well that are important, right? So, in a population where that Uncinate tract is developed more weakly, you might expect difficulty in integrating abstract aspects of semantic meaning, which are represented in the anterior temporal lobes, with emotional or motivational states, which might be driven by the orbitofrontal cortex, with the tract connecting the two structures. So that's interesting work.
Because one of the questions we have in our trajectory is about psychotherapy. Because in psychotherapy, maybe you are trying to control representations, setting goals, but there is like a ¿cómo se dice? Sobrevaloración,
Overestimation.
overestimation about the possibilities to reframe behavior talking.
Right.
But the concept of semantic cognition involves, for instance, in the default network, parts that not need to talk.
I mean, I don't know very much about the neural basis of psychotherapy, but I can see that the types of cognitive processes that I study with semantic control are potentially important for people's ability to reframe problems. A lot of psychotherapy is about thinking about a problem in a different way. And normally when we have thought about a problem lots of times, if we have a problem that's ongoing in our lives, we think about it a lot, and that tends to generate a particular habit for thinking about the problem in a certain way. The habit can be very strong, and consequently it takes a lot of control to think about that problem in a different way. So there's the more a thought or a behaviour is grounded in habit, the greater the control requirements to then change that habit. And so semantic control, or the ability to engage semantic control, is likely to be an important mediator for the success of psychotherapy in many situations, I would guess.
Psychotherapy is, in a global semantic executive ecological behavior.
I guess so. I've never done any research on psychotherapy, and obviously psychotherapy is actually very diverse. So there are lots of different kinds of psychotherapy, but ones that involve reframing problems and employing strategies, such as in cognitive behavioural therapy, for example, where people have to try to learn to engage strategies to avoid having thoughts which make them feel anxious. Or those kinds of strategies, you can imagine often people would know what the strategy was, but it would be difficult to actually use the strategy because the habit is so strong. So the ability to control your cognition is critical for the application of the strategy that you learned about when your therapist told you. People who maybe don't respond so well to that type of cognitive behavioural therapy maybe would be people whose cognitive control, particularly the control of thought or semantic cognition, might be weaker. But I've never done any research, so that's a hypothesis that we could potentially test.
And transcranial magnetic stimulation applied to clinic is linked to the semantic executive in the way of psychotherapy that is not effective.
I mean, I can see, I can imagine that it's possible that you could use brain stimulation to help people who were unable to control their cognition to use the strategies. But again, I've not done any research on that, so I don't know if that's true. And obviously, you need to be very careful in advocating those kinds of therapies. We need to establish, as a research community, if they can be effective first. In the US, for example, there's been a lot of work using transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, to try to help people with depression. And it's taken a long time, with a lot of low-quality research based on very small samples. Now, I think probably the view is that there is some evidence that it could be effective, but it's taken a long time to reach that stage. And that's a specific example of how those therapies might be used, but also the importance of establishing a protocol which is effective in high-quality research before clinicians start to use it. Because if clinicians start to use it before we have the research, then they might use it in a way that doesn't make it very easy to tell if it works or not, or who might benefit from it, if that makes sense.
Perfect.